Hi, fifth grade. Mrs. Pecora here. We're going to keep reading. I survived Hurricane Katrina 2005. And in our last chapter, we learned about our hero Barry and his friend Jay. They were making a comic to send in to hopefully win money. And then Abe came along, and right when we ended the chapter, he bent down to unhook his killer dog. So let's see what happened. And we'll continue reading. I survived Hurricane Katrina 2005. Chapter 3. Okay, here we go. Oops, sorry, boys and girls. Having a little bit of difficulty here. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3. Barry turned and put his hands over his face, bracing for the feeling of teeth ripping at his neck. But nothing happened. He peeled open his eyes and saw that Cruz was still on his leash, standing next to Abe, who was laughing his head off. Why did he think it was so funny to scare them? Barry wished he could find the courage to step forward and say, "Get off my property." He practiced that in the bathroom mirror, squinting his eyes to get a fierce look. But who was Barry kidding? He was about as fierce as one of Mom's peanut butter cookies. If only Barry was more like his father. Nothing ever got to Roddy Tucker. And then, as though Barry's thoughts had sent out an SOS, the front door opened and Dad appeared on the porch. "Hello there, Abraham," he said with a smile. Abe pulled Cruz closer and lost his usual "what are you looking at" glare. Suddenly, he looked like the old Abe, the pudgy guy in the Saints jersey who tried to show Barry and Jay how to shoot lambs. Dad had that effect on people. He could smile at a T-Rex, and the next thing they'd be making plans to have a burger together. Barry's dad was a little famous in the lower nine. His band, Roddy Tucker and the Blasters, played in jazz clubs around New Orleans, but Mom said that wasn't why people respected him. "Your father's got sweet music in his heart," Mom always said, "and everyone can hear it." Now Dad looked at Barry. "We're leaving in an hour," he said. "You need to pack up. That hurricane's getting nasty. It looks like it might be a direct hit on the city. We're leaving town." Barry stared at Dad. Leaving town for a hurricane? Not the Tuckers. Never before. Every year, a few storms fixed their sights on New Orleans, and they always petered out at the last minute. There hadn't been a bad hurricane in New Orleans in 40 years. Was Dad making this up to get Abe to hustle on home? "I'm serious," Dad said, reading Barry's doubtful look. "There's a mandatory evacuation. First time in New Orleans history." "What's that?" Jay asked. "It means if you can leave, you've got to leave," Dad said. "Your mom already called, Mr. J. You're heading to Birmingham." "What about us?" Barry asked. "Houston," Dad answered with a sorry smile. Barry groaned. He loved Mom's Texas cousins, but all of them, 5 wild little girls and their grumpy mama, lived in a teeny little house. Barry always went home with a whopper headache after visiting them. Dad, too. The hurricane must be bad to get Mom and Dad to head to Houston. Barry looked around his neighborhood. The little houses, the scraggly lawns surrounded by chain-link fences, the palm trees and big oaks. He and Jay used to pretend that those big oak trees were ancient creatures rising up from the earth's core. There were better neighborhoods in New Orleans, and sometimes Mom and Dad talked about moving to a block where police cars weren't always blaring their sirens, where Mom would feel safe walking after it got dark. But the Tucker family had been on this block in the lower 9 for 70 years. Gramps had helped his daddy build this house back when folks kept hogs in their backyards. Barry couldn't walk half a block without someone shouting hello from a porch and waving him up for a chat and a glass of iced tea. The lower 9 was home, and that was that. Abe started to slink away. "They're opening up the Superdome, Abraham," Dad called after him. "For folks without cars, you should get your grandma over to the stadium as soon as you can." Abe waved and went on his way. Dad opened the door to go inside, and the news playing on the radio echoed out to the porch. "That's right," a man's voice boomed. "This storm's a monster. It's time to leave. Get out now. Get out while you can." "You heard the man," Dad said, starting to close the door behind him. "Time to get moving." Chapter 4. Barry's stomach did a few nervous flips. The news reports had been warning about Hurricane Katrina for days, but nobody in Barry's house had been paying much attention. Dad and his band had been playing shows in Atlanta. Mom worked full-time at Cleo's preschool. She also had a little business baking cookies for restaurants in the French Quarter, the fancy neighborhood across the canal. As for Barry, he was totally focused on Avico. A tornado could have sucked up the house, and he wouldn't have noticed. But now Barry's mind started swirling. Like everyone in New Orleans, he understood what could happen if a strong hurricane struck. The city was surrounded by water. The industrial canal was just 2 blocks up from their house. Big Lake Pontchartrain was up north. The Mississippi River wormed through the middle of the city, and so many canals and channels jutted this way and that, Barry couldn't keep track of them all. Of course, there were the levees, big walls of dirt and concrete that protected the city from all that water. But some people said that the levees weren't strong enough for a really big storm. Barry thought of Hurricane Betsy, the storm that hit New Orleans the year before Dad was born. When Gramps was alive, he loved telling Betsy stories. He and Gram lived in the same house. The levee broke and the lower 9 flooded. 4 feet of water filled the living room. It had taken 6 months to get everything cleaned up, but Gramps was always proud of how the house held up to the winds. Barely lost a roof shingle, he liked to say, as he patted the wall like he'd pat the back of a loyal friend. Those Betsy stories had fascinated Barry when he was little, but they'd always seemed like ghost stories and fairy tales, stories that could never come true. Now he wondered. "Barry," said Jay, waving his hands in front of Barry's face. "Snap out of it." "Sorry," said Barry, shaking himself out of his thoughts. What about Avico? They had planned to walk to the post office after school tomorrow and send their package to a claims office in New York City. Barry had visited New York with Dad the past summer. The president of a famous college there was always inviting Dad to give talks about New Orleans jazz. "I'll mail him tomorrow," Barry said, "from Houston." "Let me have him," Jay said, holding out his hand. "I'll mail him from Birmingham." They stared at each other without budging until finally Jay blinked. That settled it. Barry won the stare-out, so he got to mail Avico. "Don't let anything happen to him," Jay said. "I won't." They stood there like they always did before they had to say goodbye. No matter how much time they spent together, it always felt like there was one more idea to talk about, one more joke to tell before they went their own ways. "Barry, honey, we gotta get ready," Mom called. It was time. Jay raised his hand up to the sky, his pinky pointing up. It took Barry a few seconds to recognize the special move they invented for Avico, so the energy from his secret power star, Beta Draconis, could flow from his pinky into his heart. Barry raised his hand too, and he and Jay linked their pinkies together in the air. Barry smiled. For just a few seconds, Barry the believer imagined that he had a power star of his own somewhere. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for now. Stay tuned for the next couple pages of I Survived Hurricane Katrina.